healthcare overhaul.
House Republicans are choosing to act now.
GOP lawmakers release their plan to replace Obamacare. Funding for Planned Parenthood. President Trump makes an offer to the nation's largest abortion provider. Women at the Vatican. Our nightly report from Rome. And the Eucharist in outer space? How a Catholic astronaut brought Jesus along for the ride. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, March 7th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Trump says he's proud to support a health care plan proposed by House Republicans, and he hopes it will pass very quickly. It defunds Planned Parenthood for 1 year. But as Jason Calvi reports, opposition from within the Republican Party is complicating the party's drive to sell the legislation to Congress and the public. Jason?
Lauren, President Trump began his day with a tweet calling it our wonderful new health care bill. Republicans are forging ahead, saying the measure called the American Health Care Act will rescue the country from the failures of Obamacare. That's despite pushback erupting within their party.
This is Obamacare gone.
Republican leaders make their pitch today.
We've arrived at the scene of a pretty big wreck, and we're trying to clean up the mess. And if we don't intercede now, fewer people will have access to insurance, period.
The Republican plan would repeal unpopular fines on people who don't have health insurance, maintain coverage for people with pre-existing medical problems, and children up to the age of 26 on their parents' plans. It would provide tax credits to help people buy coverage. But some lawmakers in the GOP are blasting the bill. Senator Rand Paul, who's also a physician, is leading that charge.
I think it's Obamacare light, and I don't think conservatives across the country are going to support it. So there's going to be a discussion now. But conservatives across the country are pro-life, but they also don't want Obamacare.
The House bill would bar people from using the tax credits for health plans that provide abortions. It also defunds Planned Parenthood, but it won't be easy to win over Democrats on that issue.
This defunding of Planned Parenthood would devastatingly harm millions of American women and men and set back American health care.
Republican leaders say they'll redirect those funds to community health centers.
So women have those services where they need them.
Every single Republican vote is going to be essential to pass this bill through the House and the Senate. Today, Rand Paul, who we heard had many objections to this bill, told me that negotiations are ongoing. House conservatives have praised the leadership for putting forward a bill, but they say they need to really negotiate all the fine details in it. Lauren?
Jason, you mentioned last night that pro-lifers were worried that the Senate parliamentarian will strip the language, stopping the tax credits from going to abortion. Do you have an update on that?
I spoke with the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, which oversees tax issue. He says the best pro-life lawyers in the Senate are working on that issue. If the pro-life language is stripped in the Senate, Lauren, many pro-life groups say they'll urge lawmakers to vote against this GOP plan.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi, thank you. Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price promotes the pro-life protections in the new health care plan.
In terms of Planned Parenthood, we think it's important that the legislature work its will on this process. It's incredibly important that we not violate anybody's conscience. We want to protect the conscience provisions that exist.
Price told reporters at the White House the new legislation was a work in progress that represents a step in the right direction. President Trump is offering to maintain federal funding for Planned Parenthood if the group stops providing abortions. The head of the nation's largest abortion provider is rejecting that offer. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee has more from the White House. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. The president says he supports women's health and is willing to back it up with federal dollars, but he's making it clear women's health shouldn't include abortion.
After a question from the New York Times about his informal proposal, President Trump confirms discussions with Planned Parenthood. He says, quote, "There is an opportunity for organizations to continue the important work they do in support of women's health, while not providing abortion services." The group's president, Cecile Richards, is spurning the offer. In a tweet, she says, Planned Parenthood is proud to provide abortion, a necessary service that's as vital to our mission as birth control or cancer screenings. On the campaign trail, Donald Trump said he had changed his mind on the life issue.
Look, they have their choice. They can do what they have to do. I'm pro-life.
In one of his first acts as president, Trump reinstated the Mexico City policy. It bans U.S. funding for international groups that perform or even promote abortions. The Trump administration is stacked with pro-lifers, including Vice President Mike Pence, who spoke at this year's March for Life.
We will not grow weary. We will not rest until we restore a culture of life in America for ourselves and our posterity.
Pro-life groups who want the government to cut all funding to Planned Parenthood are pleased with the president's efforts so far.
Well, he has not changed his position. Planned Parenthood is an abortion giant, and if they do abortions, they're not deserving of federal funding.
In his statement to the New York Times, the president points to polls indicating most Americans oppose public funding for abortion. Planned Parenthood says federal dollars already are not allowed to be used for abortion, but pro-lifers remain skeptical.
Why pro-life Americans would like to see all federal funding to Planned Parenthood be cut. How many federal dollars do they receive?
Well, Lauren, Planned Parenthood gets about $500 million federal dollars a year. About $400 million of that comes from Medicaid money.
All right, Wyatt Goolsbee at the White House. Thank you, Wyatt. On Capitol Hill today, Vice President Mike Pence meets with 3 representatives to talk about China's disgraceful human rights record. It's a cause Representative Chris Smith of New Jersey has been championing for years, and he invited me to his office earlier today to discuss the issue. You were the author of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, and at the time this report came out in October, you said that China's population control was the worst in history. You're meeting with the Vice President today to talk about human rights in China, and what are you going to say to him?
Well, that the Trump administration must have a robust policy of calling out the Chinese dictatorship's deplorable human rights record in a number of categories, the crackdown on religious believers, including the Catholic Church, the underground Catholic Church, and I've met with many of the leadership over the years, including Bishop Xu in 1994. Here's a bishop who spent 40 years being tortured. We think he may be deceased now. Nobody knows for sure. And when I met him in 1994, he had nothing but love, even for those who were persecuting him. We need a much more robust policy on human rights.
And what does that mean? What will you specifically recommend to the Vice President?
First and foremost, that the President and the Vice President and all aspects of the administration, no matter what the department is, but particularly the Foreign Affairs Department, need to speak out on these issues in an informed way, an aggressive way, diplomatic, of course, and then there needs to be linkages to other policies. You know, China has a deplorable human rights record in the area of human trafficking. I wrote the laws for combating human trafficking. One of them is called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. China should be a Tier 3 egregious violator designated country,
and instead
with sanctions. Instead, under Obama, they artificially inflated and gave China a passing grade, as they did for 15 other countries, because of political issues, not the human rights conditions on the ground. So they need to designate China as a Tier 3 country and sanction it. On religious freedom, they're already a country of particular concern pursuant to the International Religious Freedom Act. They need to be sanctioned, and there's 18 different sanctions prescribed in U.S. law to hold China to account for its horrific mistreatment of religious believers.
You have said that there's a direct link between China's domestic human rights problem and the security and prosperity of the United States. What is that
without
connection?
A doubt. The connection is in the goods that are exported to the U.S. Many of them are made by gulag labor. They're made by slave-like conditions where people get very, very small amounts of wages, no occupational and safety protections. The labor rights abuses in China are among the worst in the world. Then you have situations like the 1 and now 2 child per couple policy, which is coercion, telling women that the children that they carry are illegal and must be aborted by the state. There have been about 400 forced abortions and forced sterilizations since 1979. There's no comparison on the face of the earth in all of human history of such crimes against gender, against women and babies, as we've seen in China.
This is obviously something that you are extremely passionate about. We thank you for talking to us about it. Representative Chris Smith of New Jersey.
Lauren, thank you very much.
Democrats grilled the nominee for Deputy Attorney General over Russian interference in the presidential election. They want Rod Rosenstein to hand over the investigation to a special counsel. But he says he's not required to recuse himself, and he promises a fair investigation.
As far as I'm concerned, every investigation conducted by the Department of Justice is an independent investigation. We prosecute tens of thousands of people every year, and every one of those defendants deserves an independent prosecutor.
Rosenstein currently serves as a U.S. attorney in Baltimore. The WikiLeaks website posted thousands of documents said to be taken from the CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence. No word on whether or not that is true. The release appears to expose CIA surveillance techniques like using smartphones and smart TVs as listening devices, and the CIA has declined to comment. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering around the world. Iraqi forces make a symbolic gain in Mosul. After storming buildings overnight, they were able to hoist the Iraqi flag at a government complex previously controlled by ISIS. Troops on the ground say the complex isn't fully secured. They're still engaged in an intense battle in an effort to liberate western Mosul. The eastern side of the city was declared fully liberated in January. Thousands of stranded travelers are returning home after Pakistan temporarily reopens two main crossings on the border with Afghanistan. The border will stay open until Wednesday for nationals with valid visas who want to return home. The crossings were shut down 3 weeks ago after a wave of suicide bombings linked to ISIS. The Filipino House of Representatives approves a bill to bring back the death penalty for drug offenses. It's the result of President Rodrigo Duterte's campaign to restore capital punishment for hardcore criminals, especially drug traffickers. The Catholic Church and human rights groups oppose the change. Duterte's anti-drug crackdown has left thousands of drug suspects dead since he took office last year. More than 100 people have died from starvation and drought-related illness in Somalia. The country has been hit by a severe drought that's affecting more than 6 million people. UNICEF says a total of 1.4 million children could die of severe acute malnutrition in Somalia. The Vatican says women play a key role in society and the world, and the Church wants their input. The Pontifical Council for Culture presented its Women's Advisory Group to the media today. It's a permanent body that advises the head of the Culture Office, Cardinal Gianfranco Ravasi, on issues from a woman's perspective. Vatican correspondent Mary Shovlin joins us from Rome. Mary, Cardinal Ravasi says the all-female advisory board is not about filling a quota, and that they will really give good, great input. Did he give any other details about their work?
Lauren, he did. We have to remember the Pontifical Council for Culture, it's not just about art or music. They deal with a variety of issues like bioethics, science, all of these difficult medical questions at times. So their input will be wide-ranging, and it's not just advice. Cardinal Ravasi really wants input from this advisory group of women, concrete proposals, things they can actually put into action to make a difference. So he said this all began because he looked around his own office here in the Vatican, and he said he didn't see the fullness of God's image. Cardinal Ravasi is a scripture scholar, so he knows that God made man, male and female, he created them, and so he said we need the input of women, and so this is how this advisory group was born.
It's quite a diverse group of women, very accomplished. Tell me a little bit more about them.
They really are, Lauren. It was quite inspiring to meet so many of them today. 26 of the entire 37 were present at the press event today here in the Holy See press office. They come from all different nationalities, backgrounds, different educations. Some of these women are actresses, they're professors, they run universities, some are athletes, many are journalists, and while many of them are Italian, they're representatives from the United States, England, Chile, and just around the world. So a great diverse group. And we have to remember as well, Lauren, these women are of all different faiths. And I spoke to the group's coordinator, Consuela Corradi, and she said that this diversity is really, in religion, is something really they were looking for.
We have people from the Jewish religion and the Muslim religion, and we have non-believers too. And I think that that is really an important issue because they bring their perspective. We want to be a testimony of the possibility of dialogue in a time where dialogue is so difficult.
Lauren, I also wanted to point out that the women I spoke with today wanted to make it clear that they're not just dealing with women's issues here, but said they're dealing with all issues because all issues in the world affect women.
Thank you, Mary Shovlin, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent.
Thank you, Lauren.
Coming up, Bishop Michael Burbidge of Arlington, Virginia joins us to discuss the nationwide priest shortage and the push for more vocations. And faith in space, an astronaut's quest to receive the Eucharist on the job. Good news for religious vocations. Diocesan ordinations are on the way up. A new report by the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, also known as CARA, shows the number of ordinations to the priesthood rose by 20%. From 2012 to 2015. Joining us now is Bishop Michael Burbidge of the Arlington, Virginia Diocese. Bishop, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Lauren.
I really enjoyed our interview when you first came to town a few months ago.
That. Thank
yes,
you. Thanks for the great welcome.
Welcome again. This 20% increase that we're talking about is certainly good news, but there were some statistics. Let's take a look at some of these other statistics that were pretty alarming. CARA estimates there are 67 million Catholics in the U.S., but there is one new ordained priest for every 53,000 Catholics. And there were, after that, this is one I want to talk to you about. There were 14 dioceses that had no ordination at all.
Yes.
Are we losing too many priests? Are there enough to minister to America's Catholics?
Well, so there is some good news in this, as you mentioned, and certainly dioceses throughout our nation is experiencing great vibrancy and increase of faith in number of Catholics, so that's all good. But there is concern. There's concern in a number of dioceses throughout our country that, there are not enough priests to do all that has been expected of them in years past.
What is it like in those dioceses for priests? How difficult is it for them?
Well, there's always a concern. If you're the bishop in a diocese like that, you're always concerned. In North Carolina, where I came from in Raleigh, we had that same experience where there are priests who are by themselves ministering to large congregations with little support. So there is concern for our priests, but we will always have believed that in our church that the lay faithful are called to service and called to minister, and that brings forth tremendous leadership and also the responsibility of the lay faithful to not only collaborate with their priests, but to support them, to pray for them, to help take care of them also.
CARA has done 7 surveys, and only in Lincoln, Nebraska was it in the top 20 every time. So what do you think Lincoln, Nebraska is doing right?
Lincoln is, I think we have to drink the water that they're drinking in Lincoln. But I know one thing, a great source of their success in Lincoln, I visited the diocese a number of times because I wanted to learn firsthand, and they have a tremendous campus ministry program at the University of Nebraska, which is the source of many vocations. And
college
campuses,
right? Okay.
And so many countries have learned the importance of that, and that university has done such a great job with the peers supporting each other, no matter what vocation their friends will choose.
What do you hear from men that you counsel, and why aren't more men saying yes to the priesthood? There's someone on our staff here who went for 3 years discerning whether or not this was a vocation, and ultimately made the decision not to.
Right, and that's part of discernment. Sometimes when you enter into a seminary or formation program, God clearly speaks to you that you're being led somewhere else. There's always the fear, as we know in our society today, that impacts not only priesthood but marriage or whatever, of young people being afraid to make that lifelong commitment.
And we see marriage numbers reflecting the exact same trend.
Exactly, yes.
Mm-hmm. What is the story of your own vocation?
Well, I was very blessed. I grew up in the Philadelphia area, a very Catholic area. And
your accent doesn't give you
It doesn't give me away. And, So we had diocesan priests on our high school faculty, and I was just telling the story to our 8th graders today. We had a beautiful vocation mass for all the 8th graders of our diocese, and I was sharing the story that in my junior year, a priest just called me aside. I did not know he even knew me, and he said, "Have you ever thought about being a priest?" And I said, "Not really. A little bit I was, but not really."
This is high school?
High school.
Jeez.
And ever since he asked me that question, I could not stop thinking about it. And so that's a reminder to our parents and to our teachers and to our coaches. You may be that person. That one little question, you could be the person God's using to have someone never stop thinking about it, maybe even responding to it.
What a wonderful conversation we just had. Bishop Michael Burbidge of the Arlington, Virginia Diocese, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate it.
An out-of-the-world experience for one astronaut who wanted to bring Jesus along for the ride. Mike Hopkins spent 6 months on the International Space Station in 2013. A Catholic convert, Hopkins wanted to receive communion while on board, and his parish priest in the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston, made it possible. They sent up 6 consecrated hosts divided into 4, so Hopkins had 24 opportunities to receive the body of Christ. To read more about Hopkins' incredible journey, including how NASA responded to his conversion, visit our partners at ncregister.com. Up next, a day without women. Why some women's groups are saying no thanks. And the White House is open. President Trump surprises a 10-year-old. Two school districts cancel classes tomorrow, fearing too many teachers will take the day off to participate in a Day Without Women. The one-day protest is designed to highlight women's role in society. Karen Agnes joins us now. She's the founder and president of the Network of Enlightened Women. Karen, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me on.
First of all, tell me what this Network of Enlightened Women is.
So Network of Enlightened Women, known as NEW, is the nation's premier organization for conservative college women.
Okay,
yes,
how did you start?
We exist.
Yeah, right. I bet that's part of the reason why you founded it.
Yes, so I founded it while I was a student at the University of Virginia. I was frustrated because the women's groups weren't open to more conservative ideas. I even went to our Women's Center at UVA one day and asked if they'd be interested in co-sponsoring a new group for conservative women. They just laughed in my face and said, "Not here."
So now we are at a Day Without a Woman. It's organized by the same group who organized the January march that was here in Washington the day after the inauguration. And you wrote a piece for Forbes saying that the group isn't representative of all women, especially pro-life women. Let's take a look. You say that the focus is less about supporting all women and more about advocating for progressive policy positions on a wide variety of issues, from immigration to the environment. Why do you feel like liberal women have a handle on a movement like this, or even, especially on college campuses too?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to write on this story because it was very much a repeat about what I faced more than a decade ago when I was getting this organization started, which is if you don't fall in line with all of our progressive policies, you might as well turn in your woman card because you don't count. Right. So they're organizing under the banner of a women's march, which you might think is open to all women, but again, it's a list of liberal causes.
An issue I have about this day is that, isn't this a little bit about privilege? So if you're a working woman, how can you afford to take a day off of work, particularly in lower paying jobs?
I think that's a good point. And what about the school districts that are now closing? Alexandria is closing schools. So what happens to all those families? Yes. So what happens to all those families with children? Does that then make it more difficult for them to go to work and end up hurting those women at the workplace?
What's your alternative idea? Do you have one?
Well, I think we should be highlighting the great women in the workplace, and that's what our organization will be doing tomorrow, is highlighting quotes from women about how they got where they are because of hard work. Also, women can reach down and give a hand up to a woman who's at work with them, mentor them. They could work an extra 30 minutes. We know that men, based on the American Time Use Survey, work longer than women in the workplace. They could polish a resume. They could talk to a boss about how they can take on more work and in turn get paid more. So there are a lot more productive, concrete things that women could do that I think would really make a difference.
Karen Agnes, president of the Network of Enlightened Women, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Public tours are up and running again at the White House, and the first group received an eye-opening surprise. President Donald Trump rolled out the red carpet. Take a look at who's standing behind him in that portrait. But he posed for a photo with, look at this 10-year-old boy gave him a hug as the other tourists looks on. The White House tours have been on hold since Inauguration Day, and if you want to see 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, I can't guarantee you'll meet the president, but you can make requests through your congressional representative. That does it for us this evening. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, I'm Lauren Ashburn. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter for a behind-the-scenes look at News Nightly, and I'll see you again tomorrow night. Good night, and God bless you.